What it do, cucks? It's your boy, the hater, and we're in Money in the Bank season, and I've been waiting a long time to make this video, basically since last year's Money in the Bank. Now, things have aligned only for one episode, but the hater can hope, in such a way where this video becomes more relevant than it otherwise would have been, and that makes me happy. The video is kind of like a two-parter, right? There's two things that I'm going to say here. Number one, and most importantly, that is that LA Knight should win the Money in the Bank. This is one of those moments, right? Just like back in the day, in my opinion, Christian Cage should have won the Money in the Bank because he would have made a great Money in the Bank holder. This is the same thing, except maybe even more important now because at least the alternatives back then were bearable, you know? So there's that. Now, with all that being said, the second and very, not equally, but very important part of this video is about how much Money in the Bank sucks ass. Now, the concept of the Money in the Bank is excellent. You know, I'm not concerned about that. I'm not concerned about the match. I'm concerned about what spot, what purpose the Money in the Bank ladder match and the accompanying briefcase have on modern day WWE. That's where I kind of get a little bit frazzled, motherfucks. So let me put it to you this way, right? Back in the day, there were ways to push wrestlers, right? This usually meant a nice win streak and a few good stories. This then makes the wrestler interesting, and the wrestler starts feeling like a bigger deal, right? When there was a hierarchy, a pyramidal type hierarchy, right? Wrestlers could climb the pyramid until they get to the top. The best example of this that I can think of, ironically, is Edge, who also won the first Money in the Bank. And it just so happened that his rise to the top coincided with him winning the Money in the Bank, right? When Edge won the Money in the Bank, the first ever, right? I knew it was going to be Edge. We all knew. Like, there was always a chance it could be Jericho because he's like, you know, he's Jericho, right? And also because he invented the Money in the Bank. But it just felt like it was going to be Edge because you had this feeling while Edge was coming up around that WrestleMania that this was Edge's moment, right? Edge, like the Attitude era was firmly over. The invasion angle was firmly over. Edge played a relatively, I don't want to say like important role, but he played a non-zero role. He played a mid-card champion role during that, at least in part, right? That didn't mean much back then because it was like a main event type feud, but nevertheless, right? Edge was there. He stood out. He started becoming a respectable mid-carder. All of this started after Edge won the King of the Ring, and he had his feud with Christian, and then eventually Edge went on to win the Money in the Bank. Now, here's the difference between Edge and, let's say, I don't know, Tiffany Stratton, right? I understand there's many differences between these two long-haired blondes, but the main difference that I'm going to focus on is their year as Money in the Bank holder. It's a little bit different because now the Money in the Bank is like in the middle of the summer versus back in the day, it was at Mania. So the day after Mania, the Raw after Mania, the Money in the Bank guy is basically the best positioned guy to become champion other than the champion themselves, right? So, or the champions, I should say, themselves. So with that being said, that year, Edge developed into the rated R superstar, right? That was the year when Edge became a thing, you know? And he held it from, I believe, April, obviously, when WrestleMania is, to New Year's Revolution, there it is, which either happens in late December or early January, given the name, right? He held it during that time, but while he held it, he didn't just hold the Money in the Bank and run around losing every match like Tiffany Stratton. He didn't become somebody's lackey. No, what he did was in real life, he stole Lita, Matt Hardy's girlfriend, from Matt Hardy, which led into one of the greatest feuds, in my opinion, of all time. Edge versus Matt Hardy. I will not die, Matt Hardy, right? Which culminated in a very, very shitty match where Lita just like ties up Matt with her body on the ropes and Edge like climbs the ladder to ensure that he gets to stay on Raw while Matt Hardy's moved to SmackDown. There was another like Cyber Tuesday match where it was like Ray and Matt versus like Edge and somebody else, and Ray and Matt win from SmackDown. But that wasn't really like the feud, right? That was just like, you know, a consequence of the feud. But anyways, the point I'm trying to make here, and I don't want to go too far on the lore here of Edge, but the fact is that during that year, not only did Edge have an amazing feud, then he went on to have another amazing feud in kayfabe where he steals Lita from Kane, right? This thing was like a two-parter. He stole Lita from Matt in real life, stole Lita from Kane, and then stole Lita from Matt in kayfabe as well, right? But when he stole Lita from Kane, that was awesome because number one, it paralleled real life. And number two, it was part of this Gold Rush tournament where the winner would get a WWE title match. Now, this is Edge. He already has the money in the bank, but this doesn't preclude him from trying to win and ultimately winning a tournament that gives him a championship match, right? As a matter of fact, me and many others thought that during this tournament, if Edge he was either going to win, right? Or maybe he was going to lose in the finals, and then he was going to cash in, and this tournament would be the beginning of his title run, you know? And this was during like the middle of Cena's situation. So there you have it, right? But basically, Edge held it forever, and when he cashed in, he felt like a main eventer. Nowadays, this is not the case. The Money in the Bank is now a shortcut to get jobbers and turn them into main eventers inexplicably, right? All of a sudden, Tiffany Stratton wins the Money in the Bank, and then eventually she cashes in on Nia Jax. Now, cashing in on Nia Jax, like after being her lackey, is the classic lackey turning into like a respectable wrestler situation. The problem with it, of course, was they teased it 100 times. And two, it was never explained why after beating Nia Jax, all of a sudden Tiffany Stratton just became a better wrestler, right? While she was a lackey, she was having trouble beating like Michin, and now she's beating Charlotte at WrestleMania, right? It wasn't explained how she got so much better, right? What happened? Did her winning the title magically make her a better wrestler? Doesn't make any sense, right? You still have to explain why someone has risen to the level of a main eventer, right? You can't just be like, well, they won the Money in the Bank. What do you expect? Well, if that's all I can expect, then the last few title runs that have involved Money in the Bank have involved people that have then gone back to become jobbers. Drew McIntyre, Damian Priest, to name a few, right? They're not really main eventers, as evidenced by, Saturday Night Main Event and the last several pay-per-views they've been a part of. They're not really big-time wrestlers in any capacity, you know? So, the idea essentially is that, for better or for worse, there is nothing that is done with modern-day Money in the Bank winners that would justify them being big deals, you know? Nothing is done with them. So now, that, coupled with the fact that the only way to become world champion in this company is either through Money in the Bank or through WrestleMania, basically, it's fucking over. You know what I'm saying? Nobody wins and loses titles anywhere else, right? Maybe Gunther can win at a King of the Ring, you know, but that's like the only kind of, title change that has happened in the last like 5 years that hasn't been either at Mania or a direct consequence of Money in the Bank. You know what I mean? Now, a lot of Money in the Banks are also happening at Mania, but you know what I'm getting at, right? They're not making any new stars. And this brings me to the man of the hour, the megastar himself, L.A. Knight. Yeah. Given everything that I've said just now about how the only way to become a WWE champion or even a world heavyweight champion is to win Money in the Bank and or win the Rumble, and given that we, relatively speaking, just had the Rumble a few months ago, and obviously Money in the Bank is coming up soon, this is the time, in my personal opinion, to push LA Knight, right? LA Knight is the only wrestler on the roster, in my personal opinion again, that can be taken seriously as a legitimate full-time champion, right? The fact that Jey Uso became a champion before LA Knight and the fact that Jey Uso became a champion, period, is already, still something that we're all dealing with. But the facts are that if LA Knight does not win this Money in the Bank, it is guaranteed that whoever does win it is going to be an inferior wrestler, right? An inferior presence, and they're going to have an inferior run. Imagine if it's Solo Sikoa, who's the only person that we know is in this match. I suspect that it won't be him, and that Jacob Fatu will be in the match. Jacob Fatu will almost win the Money in the Bank, and he'll get screwed over by Solo Sikoa and or JC Mateo, and then they're going to have their feud that nobody cares about. And hopefully Solo Sikoa comes out on top of that, by the way. But taking those two guys out, and assuming there's going to be some jobbers in this match, like maybe like a Kofi Kingston or something, right? That is not going to win. It should be LA Knight. It should be LA Knight. I don't care if Drew McIntyre's in there or anything like that. It should be LA Knight. It's his time. He is the most apt. And in my opinion, he is one of the few wrestlers that would benefit from Money in the Bank more than they would from winning the Rumble, right? It just feels like the Money in the Bank was made for a wrestler like LA Knight, right? LA Knight is very similar in character and personality to Mr. Kennedy. I actually have a mic in my hand and I'm kind of doing it like he does. You know, very similar, right? Another good Money in the Bank winner. Nothing came of it, but you understand what I'm getting at, right? That's the correct way to push some wrestlers, right? Edge is another one. That's why he's had it twice. Miz is another one, right? These opportunistic, charlatanistic type of characters. You know what I mean? But like a character or even a wrestler, period, like Drew McIntyre or even Damian Priest, it just doesn't make any sense. They're these big, strong alpha male types, right? And the idea is they don't really have any like stardom or like coolness to them like LA Knight does, nor are they duplicitous and sneaky like Edge or The Miz are, right? Like, that's not their character. They're just big, strong guys who should just win the match, right? It's like the same reason why, for example, giving the money back to Gunther wouldn't make any sense, right? But LA Knight is perfect for it. And as a result, in my personal opinion, LA Knight should win. Now, that's not the only reason, right? The fact is that during this entire, let's call it 1.5-year run, that LA Knight has had some prominence, winning the US title, right? He hasn't done anything, right? He's just kind of been there in the mid-card situation, in the mid-card scene, wrestled the Logan Pauls, wrestled the Kevin Owenses, you know what I mean? Like, wrestled the Santos Escobars and Andrades, you know, like, these people are below LA Knight, clearly. LA Knight has the size, the charisma, the look, the personality, right? And honestly, even the in-ring skills to be a world champion. And more importantly, with the Money in the Bank, LA Knight's going to be one of the few people that can elevate himself through the Money in the Bank, right? It's just like, remember when Braun Strowman was Monster in the Bank? Or when Brock Lesnar had the Money in the Bank? You know, like, there's some wrestlers just aren't fit for the Money in the Bank, right? I mentioned, John Cena, Drew McIntyre, Damian Priest, Otis, right? There's a lot of wrestlers that just, it doesn't fit them, right? Or even if it does fit them to a degree, like The Miz. It fit The Miz, but he didn't do anything with it, right? It didn't feel like a big deal when The Miz had it. It felt like, oh, Miz is next, good for him, But if LA Knight has it, it can be almost like part of his character, right? Think of the King of the Ring, right? And compare King Booker to King Sheamus or King Xavier Woods, right? King Booker made it into a thing. It became part of his personality. It became part of his presentation. Whereas with Sheamus, he wore this Irish crown like you would expect. And he's like, I'm the High King, are ya? And Xavier Woods became like a goof, But not in like a tongue-in-cheek way, but in like a ha-ha-ha, aren't I funny way. Like Booker T, when he was King Booker, he wasn't like, look how funny I am being king. It was presented as this guy's like, has delusions of grandeur, he's losing his mind, and he thinks he's a king. Whereas Xavier Woods was just kind of like playing up to it, you know what I mean? So the same thing that King Booker did with the Money in the Bank, LA Knight might be able to do with the Money in the Bank. Now, the thing that Booker did with the King of the Ring, LA Knight might be able to do with the Money in the Bank. I said might. We don't know for a fact, right? But if anybody can, it's going to be him. Like, can you imagine Solo Sikoa or fucking Jacob Fatu as Money in the Bank winner? Can you think of anything worse? Like, that's on the level of Otis winning. You know what I mean? So what I'm getting at here, motherfuckers, is that we need to have an opportunity to give LA Knight his push, right? If he's ever going to get one, now's the time. And if now's not the time, I'm going to make the same video around January when it's time for the Rumble again to argue the same thing. There is nobody that would benefit more from a push than LA Knight. In addition, there is nobody that should be pushed more to WWE's benefit than LA Knight. He will outsell Jey Uso if he's champion. He will be the top merch seller. LA Knight is old school cool. You know what I mean? I need to patent that shit. Old school cool. You bet your hat I'm going to do that soon, cuts. But the point is, you have to be reasonable. You have to be reasonable. When it's time for the Money in the Bank, you have to ask yourself two questions. Number one, what are we going to do with this, right? If it's going to be this quick cash-in, like Drew McIntyre, complete waste, then there's no point. If it's going to be a prolonged cash-in with no actual build, like Damian Priest, then there's no point. Same thing with King of the Ring. If it's going to be Gunther, who is the worst King of the Ring of all time, because he basically just won it and said, I'm now number one contender. Like, he didn't care that he was the king. And he didn't care that he was King Gunther, right? Which is fine. I'm not saying every person that wins the King of the Ring needs to become like a kingly character, right? Because, quite frankly, King Booker did it, and like now there's no point in anyone else doing it. But they need to do something with it, right? They need to, like, for example, the first Queen of the Ring, like Zelina Vega, she's from Queens. She should be like, I'm the Queen of Queens. You know what I mean? That'd be cool. But anyways, it doesn't matter. The point is, Cucks, Maybe she said that. Who the fuck knows? The point is, something can be done with it. Doesn't necessarily mean that something should be done with it, but something can be done with it. And if something can be done with it, we need to entertain the possibility of doing something with it, right? It's like when Santino won the Intercontinental title. He could have had a dry, random-ass, Gunther-like Intercontinental title run, or he could have the title run that he had, which was 100 times more memorable. It was cringe back then, but it's funny in hindsight, where he would be like, you see, the honky-tonky man has been champion for 600 days, right? And then it's like, it showed like the Santino title reign, and it'd be like 12 days or something, you know what I mean? Then he'd be like, I'm so close, you know? That was great. They did something with it. You know what I mean? It's not enough to just have it, right? Have them do something with it. Another great but small example of this is Carmelo Hayes winning the Andre the Giant Battle Royal. Now he has the Dre necklace on his neck, right? Which is like just a picture of Andre the Giant's face. Nobody else has done this. Baron Corbin won it. He raised his arms up, held the trophy once, and then Michael Cole had to remind us how he won the prestigious Andre the Giant Battle Royal Memorial Trophy. You know? Like, Melo is incorporating it a little bit into his character. Now, granted, this is not something that you can or maybe even should incorporate, but the Money in the Bank is, right? LA Knight is the closest thing we have to an Edge, and Edge did a good job with it. So logic would dictate that LA Knight should be picked for that reason alone. Now, if you don't want to pick him for that reason, I understand. That's a personal thing, you know? You may not like that kind of scenario, right? You may have different plans, Lee Fitting or Triple H, but in my personal opinion, it just makes the most sense, you know? I see and I sense that they're hopefully going that way, but because WWE never pulled the trigger on various other superstars like Christian and even like Booker T until it was too late. Christian too, he got the title run too, but until it was too late, you know, they didn't pull the trigger with Booker T or Christian when they were like over. You know what I mean? Booker T had to get himself over again. You know, I could see them not doing it this time either, right? But in my opinion, that would be a defect. That would be a mistake. That would be a continuing conundrum, you know? Nothing good would come of that. So I personally believe that the correct move is to put it on LA Knight. It'll give us something to talk about. It'll give us something to look forward to, you know? And at the very least, it's a way to give some more exposure to LA Knight. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? And with that being said, that's all I got to say about that. If it ain't LA Knight, then I don't give a fuck who it is. You know what I'm saying? I don't give a fuck. If if Sami Zayn wins, let's say, for example, right? You never know. If Sami Zayn wins, I don't care. I don't care if Sami Zayn becomes champion tomorrow, at WrestleMania, in 10 years, in 10 days, in 10 weeks. Nobody gives a flying fuck. You know what I'm saying? But with LA Knight, I think most fans, I was going to say we all, but maybe not all of us, but the majority of us would be very excited. And the majority of us, I think, would be looking forward to the moment where LA Knight cashes in. And I think it would be the closest thing I would get to marking out in a long, long, long time. And I really hope it happens for those reasons. Shout out to LA Knight. Shout out to all of you. With everybody saying, hater.